The map ended where the certainty did. Sarah Whitlock stood at the edge of the bluff, boots planted in red dust, her notebook braced against the steady wind. Below her, the land unraveled into a maze of canyons, dry riverbeds, and jagged stone, marked unnamed and unforgiving. This was the edge of the map, the place where clean lines dissolved into blank parchment. It thrilled her every time. Behind her, someone cleared his throat, loudly, deliberately. "You're standing too close," Brent Calder said. "One loose rock, and you'll be part of the terrain." Sarah didn't turn. "If I fall, you can sketch a warning note. Here lies Sarah Whitlock, too bold for her own good." Brent snorted and dropped his pack with a thud. "You always mistake recklessness for courage, and you always mistake caution for wisdom," she shot back, finally glancing at him. "If we don't get a proper vantage point, this entire canyon system will be wrong." Brent adjusted his hat against the sun, dark eyes scanning the drop. He was taller than her, broader, too, built like a man meant to haul equipment and survive long weeks in hostile land. His maps were known for their precision military outposts, and railroad companies trusted his work. Sarah's, on the other hand, were said to breathe, she named ridges, traced trails used by settlers and tribes alike, and marked water sources no official survey cared about. That difference was why they'd been paired, and why they argued constantly. "We already have bearings from the south," Brent said, pulling out his compass. "If we triangulate from the ridge behind us, we'll miss the tributaries," Sarah interrupted. "The river splits twice before it disappears underground. You won't see that from back there." "You think it splits twice?" "I know it does. I followed it yesterday." Brent's jaw tightened. "Alone?" "Yes, because someone refused to move camp before sunrise." He met her stare, heat rising between them, not just from the desert sun. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of sage and dry stone, and somewhere far below, a hawk cried out. They had been traveling together for 3 weeks, charting territory west of the last known rail stop. Supplies were limited, tempers shorter, and yet every map they completed together was better than anything either had done alone. Sarah turned back to the view, sketching quick lines. "This land doesn't care about your perfect angles, Brent. It shifts, it hides, and it kills people who don't respect it," he replied. "I'm trying to make sure we both come back alive." That gave her pause. She glanced at him again, really looked this time. Dust streaked his sleeves. A faint cut marked his cheek. Knew he hadn't mentioned it. "Fine," she said quietly. 5 more minutes. Then we move back." Brent hesitated, surprised, then nodded. He stepped closer, anchoring a rope around a sturdy rock and handing her the end, just in case. Their fingers brushed. It was brief, accidental, but something in Sarah's chest tightened all the same. She took the rope, steadying herself as she leaned forward to finish her sketch. The canyon stretched endlessly, dangerous and beautiful, like the space between them uncharted tents and impossible to ignore. Neither of them noticed the dark clouds beginning to gather on the far horizon. Not yet. By nightfall, the sky no longer belonged to the sun. Dark clouds rolled in, low and heavy, swallowing the stars one by one as Sarah and Brent worked in silence to secure camp. The wind had shifted sharper now, carrying the metallic scent of rain, where rain rarely fell. Sarah hammered the last tent stake into the hard ground. "This storm wasn't in your calculations, was it?" Brent tightened a rope and glanced skyward. "No, which means it's either passing fast or it's going to remind us who's in charge." She smirked faintly. "The land always is." Thunder growled in the distance, deep and impatient. They had chosen a narrow shelf near the canyon, wall protected from wind, but dangerously close to runoff paths. If rain came too hard, Brent crouched over the maps spread across a canvas tarp, weighing down the corners with stones. "If this turns bad, we may need to move east at first light. The canyon floor could flood." Sarah wiped sweat and dust from her brow. "We still haven't mapped the northern bend." "Sarah, I know," she cut in. then softened. I know. But if we leave now, someone else will come along and name it wrong. They'll erase what's really here. Brent looked up at her then, really looked. Firelight danced across her determined face, her dark hair pulled back in a loose braid, strands already escaping. He had seen plenty of mapmakers' men who measured land like it was something to conquer. Sarah treated it like something alive, and that frightened him. You can't save every piece of land by putting it on paper, he said quietly. No, she replied, just as quiet. But I can try. Rain began as scattered drops, hissing when they struck the fire. Within minutes, it turned steady, drumming against canvas and stone. The canyon echoed with the sound, amplifying it until it felt like the world itself was breathing hard. Brent stood. We should secure the gear. If the water rises. A sharp crack split the air. The ground shuddered beneath them. Sarah stumbled, grabbing Brent's arm as a section of rock sheared off the canyon wall 20 yards away, crashing into the darkness below. The sound echoed endlessly, followed by silence that felt too heavy. That, Brent said grimly, is exactly what I was worried about. Rain poured harder now, cold and relentless. Water began to snake across the ground, searching for paths downhill. We can't stay here, Sarah said. I know a higher outcrop, Brent replied, but it's narrow. We'll have to move fast. They worked without arguing, urgency replacing tension. Brent shouldered the heaviest pack, while Sarah gathered the maps, holding them close beneath her coat, like something precious and fragile. The climb was brutal. Mud slicked the stone, and rain blurred Sarah's vision. Once she slipped, heart-lurching, but Brent caught her, arms wrapping around her waist with unyielding strength. I've got you, he said firmly. Don't fight me. She didn't. They reached the outcrop, just as a surge of muddy water rushed through their former campsite, sweeping away loose stones and extinguishing what remained of the fire. From above, they watched the land transform dry channels becoming rivers, silent earth roaring to life. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, Sarah exhaled shakily. If you hadn't insisted on the rope earlier today, Brent nodded once. And if you hadn't mapped the runoff paths yesterday, I wouldn't have known where not to go. Their eyes met in the dim light, rain streaking between them. Something shifted, subtle, undeniable. Not agreement, exactly. Understanding. The storm raged on, trapping them on the narrow ledge with only each other and the maps they'd risked their lives to save. Sarah pulled her coat tighter and managed a small, tired smile. Looks like we're relying on each other now, whether we like it or not. Brent returned the smile, just as tired. Seems the territory decided for us. Thunder rolled again, but this time, it didn't sound quite as threatening. Not with someone standing beside you at the edge of the map. Morning came slowly, filtered through a sky still heavy with retreating clouds. The storm had carved new lines into the land-fresh rivulets cut through soil. Stones rearranged as if the canyon itself had redrawn its own map overnight. Sarah knelt near the edge of the outcrop, sketching quickly, her fingers stiff with cold. The river widened here, she murmured, at least 10 feet more than yesterday. Brent studied the terrain through a brass spyglass, and the western slope collapsed further down. If we don't note it now, this entire section will be wrong within a season. She glanced at him, surprised. You're agreeing with me. He lowered the glass, one corner of his mouth lifting. Don't get used to it. They worked side by side, sharing instruments without common compass, ruler, charcoal. The tension that once sparked at every exchange had settled into something steadier. Not peace, exactly, but alignment. Like two hands, finally gripping the same tool. By midday, the ground was firm enough to descend. They moved carefully, testing each step. At the canyon floor, they discovered the storm had erased the trail they'd followed in. Sarah frowned at the blank stretch of land that wasn't there before. Brent unfolded the map, comparing it to the horizon. Landmarks are gone. We'll have to navigate by bearing your way, she said, without accusation. And by instinct, he added, nodding toward her. Yours. They set off east, the sun breaking through clouds in sharp, blinding shards. Hours passed in quiet concentration. Sarah noted subtle shifts, the way the grass bent, the sound of water beneath stone. Brent counted steps, checked angles, adjusted their course with careful precision. By late afternoon, fatigue crept in. Sarah slowed, her shoulders stiff. You're limping, Brent said. It's nothing. He stopped anyway. Sit, she sighed, but obeyed, easing onto a rock. Her boot was soaked, the leather stiff with dried mud. When she pulled it off, her ankle was swollen and dark with bruising. That's not nothing, Brent muttered. She winced as he knelt, inspecting it with surprising gentleness. You don't get to scold me. You walked through half a canyon with a bleeding cheek yesterday. He paused. You noticed. I map details, she said softly. He wrapped her ankle with a clean strip of cloth from his kit. Movements practiced. We'll slow our pace. Camp early. Sarah studied, his hands steady, capable, you know. You don't just map land. You take care of people too. Brent huffed quietly. Someone has to keep you alive long enough to finish your sketches. She smiled, warmth spreading despite the pain. They camped near a stand of scrub trees, the air cooling fast as evening settled. Brent managed a small fire while Sarah traced their route so far, adding notes in the margins: storm-altered terrain, unstable slopes, new water sources. This map won't look like the others, she said. No, Brent agreed. It'll be better. The silence stretched, comfortable now. Coyotes called in the distance, their voices rising and falling like a song. Sarah spoke without looking up. Why do you do this, Brent? Risking your life for lines on paper. He stared into the fire. Because when I was a boy, my father followed a bad map. Led a wagon train straight into a dry valley. People died. I promised myself I'd never let that happen again. She swallowed. Then maybe we're doing the same work after all. He met her gaze across the flames. Something unspoken passed between them. Respect, shared purpose. Something deeper still. The land around them was still wild, still dangerous. But for the first time, Sarah felt certain of their direction. Not just on the map, but with each other. They reached the ravine just before noon. The next day, what had once been a shallow cut in the land was now a gaping wound, widened by the storm into a roaring channel of muddy water. The current rushed fast and loud, carrying branches and stones with its evidence of the power that still moved through the earth. Sarah stopped short. That wasn't here before. It was, Brent said grimly. Just smaller. The crossing marked the last barrier between them and the eastern ridge, where their supply cache and safe return route waited. Without crossing, they'd be forced south into unfamiliar territory. With dwindling rations, Brent scanned the ravine. There's a fallen cottonwood upstream. If it's still anchored, we might be able to cross single file. Sarah followed his gaze. The trunk spanned most of the gap, slick with water and stripped bark. Below it, the current churned violently. One slip, she said, and you're gone. He nodded. Which is why I'll go first. Absolutely not. Brent turned to her, eyebrows raised. I'm heavier, more stable, and if you fall, I lose the only compass that actually knows what it's doing. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, despite the tension. You trust my compass now. I trust you, she said, before thinking. The words hung between them, heavier than the storm clouds still lingering above. Brent went first anyway. He secured a rope around his waist and anchored the other end to a boulder. Step by careful step, he edged across the trunk, arms extended, boots sliding slightly on the wet wood. The ravine roared below him, impatient and unforgiving. He reached the far side and secured the rope. Your turn. Sarah took a breath, heart pounding, and stepped onto the log. The world narrowed to the rough wood beneath her boots and the steady tension of the rope in her hands. Halfway across, the trunk shifted, she gasped, as her foot slipped body, pitching sideways. The rope snapped taut, jerking her hard. Pain flared in her ankle, and panic surged like the water below. "Sarah," Brent shouted. "I'm her." Voice broke. She forced herself to breathe. "I'm still here. Look at me," he commanded. "Not the water. Me." She lifted her gaze. Brent stood firm on the far bank, eyes locked on hers, hands gripping the rope with unwavering strength. "Move when I say," he continued. "Slow, together." She nodded, trusting him completely now. Inch by inch, she crossed the rest of the way, collapsing to her knees when she reached solid ground. Brent was beside her instantly, pulling her into his arms before either of them realized what they were doing. She clutched his coat, breath shaking, feeling the solid reassurance of him alive, warm, real. "I've got you," he whispered again. She looked up at him, rainwater dripping from her lashes. "You always do." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The nearness, the shared danger, the quiet certainty, all pressed in until there was no space left for denial. Brent leaned in, forehead resting against hers. "When we finish this map, I don't want this to be the end." Sarah's heart hammered. "It won't be." They pulled back reluctantly, the ravine still roaring behind them, but something had changed irrevocably. The lines between them, once sharp and combative, had softened, redrawn by trust. They crossed the ridge by sunset, the land opening up before them like a promise. And for the first time since setting out, neither of them felt alone at the edge of the map. The eastern ridge rose gently, bathed in gold, as the sun slipped low behind the hills. From its crest, Sarah and Brent could see everything they had crossed: canyons, reshaped by storm, winding rivers that now gleamed like molten copper, and the vast, unnamed stretches of land that had tested every step they took. Their supply cache waited just beyond a cluster of rocks, untouched, proof that they had made it. Sarah set her pack down and unrolled the final map, smoothing it carefully against the stone. The parchment bore scars of the journey water stains, smudged charcoal, hurried notes in the margins. But it was alive with detail, honest, true. Brent crouched beside her, compass resting idle in his palm. "No straight lines," he said, almost in awe. She smiled. "No lies." They worked in quiet harmony, adding the last markings together. Brent corrected angles where precision mattered. Sarah named places where meaning mattered more than measure the split river, the fallen cottonwood, the narrow crossing that had nearly taken her life. When it was done, Sarah leaned back on her hands, exhaustion and satisfaction mingling deep in her bones. "This map will change how people travel through this land." Brent nodded. "It might save lives." She turned to him, "Including ours." The wind moved softly across the ridge, tugging at her hair. Brent reached out, brushing a loose strand behind her ear, with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I came out here thinking I only trusted numbers," he said. "But this land taught me something else." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What's that?" "That the most important bearings aren't written on any map." He leaned in, and this time, when he kissed her, there was no urgency, only certainty. The kind born from shared danger, shared purpose, and trust earned inch by inch. They stood there long after the sun dipped below the horizon, holding the finished map between them like a promise. Tomorrow they would return to the world beyond the blank spaces. 2 railroads and offices, and men who would stamp approval without ever knowing the cost. But tonight, at the edge of the map, Sarah and Brent had charted something entirely their own. Not just land, but love. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.